Attack and dominate. It is a new week on the Podcast Daily. Happy Monday from Bill Landis and me, Austin Ward. What an interesting voice at the end of that video in the middle of last week, wasn't it, Bill?
Am I going to have to pretend to be Schlegel on this video?
Yeah.
Because I don't have that kind of juice. Like, I just want to get that out there now. That's not me.
Yes, you do. Hydrate.
I don't think so.
Get some, shin angles. Make sure you're going forward. Hydrate again. All gas, no brakes. Gas station ready. You can check them all off.
I know the taglines for sure, but
okay.
I can't do them justice. Yeah.
Well, we were talking about the winter workouts and the start of that last week on Wednesday. Berman and I did that show, and it was some of his picks and a couple of mine of dudes that were transforming and what we thought. Some guys who were maybe the most intriguing to us. And Bill missed out on the fun. Now, we did hint that maybe Anthony Schlegel would be returning to take part in that with Ohio State in a staffer role. He's not full-time permanently around. Not sure the exact wording that Ohio State is using here, but they are bringing somebody back into the fold here to help bring some of these results. And since we hinted at it, Bill, I do think that having somebody with his mentality, with his passion, with his energy, after a stint there in the NFL and running a shop there with Jacksonville, we all remember, him being on the sideline and the Nebraska tackle. What was that? Gosh, almost 12 years ago now.
It's a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. But this seems like a pretty obvious positive move in my mind.
Yeah, and I honestly felt sort of inevitable to me, and not that like Schlegel was going to come back and be a full-time guy, but just like a part of the program again, I think in some capacity if opportunity allowed. And I think it's good for Ohio State. Like, it's obviously Anthony Schlegel has familiarity, with Mickey Marotti's strength program, but even then it still feels like some fresh eyes there. Like, he's been away from a little while. He has the NFL experience. So I think it's good to like kind of go away, come back, maybe you get some different perspective, learn some different things that can be helpful for Ohio State. Obviously, you like his juice in the program, like you like his energy around Ohio State's players as much as possible. And like, this might sound a little corny and cliche, I suppose, but at a time when Ohio State is, desperately trying to get back on the right side of the rivalry with Michigan, I don't think it's ever a bad thing to have former Buckeyes in the building in whatever capacity you can do it. So obviously they have a few on the coaching staff, and I think that's really helpful. There's former players around all the time, and now you have another with Schlegs, and Lord knows he wants to beat Michigan as bad as anybody too. So I think it's really good for Ohio State from a lot of different angles to have somebody like that back in the program, and whatever, even if it's on a part-time capacity.
Yeah, I remember talking, with him on the Podcast Daily after the loss to Michigan, and like how much it was still hurting him to watch, and a couple of days later not wanting to think about it in the recovery process for him. And he's like, what can you do to help support the program? Like, if you're sitting on the couch in Florida, or coming up occasionally, or talking with Bobby Carpenter, or talking with me, he's always giving back to the program in various ways, but this is an opportunity to do it more directly. Like, he can now say, well, what is Anthony Schlegel doing to help beat Michigan? Well, he's in winter workouts, he's in mat drills, he's pushing these guys to compete. And you could hear some of those buzzwords there in one of those offseason videos that Ohio State posted last week. They're getting started on that, and we rattled through a few of those guys. Bill, I'm sure that you would probably echo a few of the names that Berman and I mentioned last week, but who did we leave out? Who's got your eye over the coming 6 weeks before spring ball starts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're on the same page with a lot of guys. One that is, and actually I can't remember if you guys talked about him or not, but he is sort of front of mind for me is Sonny Styles, only because like I want to see what that weight number is like when we get the updated spring roster, because I think he played at like 230 last year, and I think earlier in the program he was like in the 220s. And if that's a number that we see start creeping up toward 240, then I think that's a sign that maybe he's being at least considered to move down closer to the line of scrimmage. Like I think we know that it's been a bit of a struggle for him to stay, I think, at the weight you need to stay at to be a safety in college football, or at least play a deep safety in college football, certainly in the NFL. And Sonny's just got a really big frame, and I think has just been destined to play a little bigger probably than he has played at Ohio State. And, you know, you go through winter workouts, and I think you're aware of that, and you try to do things where like guys are getting the work in that they need, but try to keep that number down if you're going to play a position that requires you to be a little leaner, I guess. And if that number gets higher, then I think it's another, I don't know, hint or a talking point for the agenda, I guess, if you're someone who thinks that Sonny should be playing linebacker. So that's, I try not to get too caught up in like, oh, this guy's weight went up, this guy's weight went down, whatever. But I think that one would actually be telling if it like kind of stays the same or if it ticks up a little bit. That actually might mean something in terms of like positional usage.
I wouldn't ever pretend to be an expert on the strength and conditioning, field science, the ideal body weight for these guys to play at. But I do know that, like right now, if Sonny Styles even smells a French fry, he's going to go up to 250 pounds, let alone eats it. I mean, he has been working to keep that weight really down. I mean, I don't think with the potential for him to grow into that body type that he has, the work ethic that he has as well, the height that he has, I don't think he can remain down in that 230 range. I don't think that he will. And I guess it doesn't necessarily preclude him from playing safety moving forward. Could do that. I don't know exactly how it would look. You're probably not going to be a freewheeling center fielder if you get up to close to 250 or more. And I don't know neither of us know for sure what it's going to look like over the next 6 weeks. But I do think that there has been a lot of conversation about letting him, whatever happens with his physical development, let that happen and then make a decision. And that maybe there's more momentum for that to be at linebacker. We keep talking about it a lot, probably too much.
Yeah.
When you factor in the Caleb Downs part of that too, that also is a factor here for what that means for his future position. But I do think that you're right that by the first week in March, we're going to have a more clear picture, of where he should be based on what happens for him in the weight room, on the mats, everything else, as Ohio State decides what it thinks is best for him physically.
Yeah, it just feels to me sort of like I don't know, like I think typically this has a pejorative connotation, but in this sense I don't mean it that way. But like kind of like letting nature take its course a little bit, like Sonny, and that's just based off like stuff that Sonny has said. Like he understands that he is, I think, destined to be a little bit bigger than he is currently. And it doesn't mean he's going to be less of an athlete or slower or whatever. It just means he's going to have all those really exciting traits and a little bit of a bigger frame, I guess. And like he wouldn't be the first guy to like fight against that, I guess, to try to play a different position. It'll depend on, I guess, on where Ohio State feels like it needs him most. And you're right, we probably do talk about him playing linebacker too much for something that's, one, not happened to, like, there's been some discussion, but not a ton. Certainly not a ton, like publicly, aside from us kind of theorizing on things. Like I think Sonny was asked by Doug last year. I can't remember if it was during the spring or the season, but he was open to the idea because I think he understands that probably that is going to happen for him one way, shape, or form, whether that's Ohio State or in the NFL. He's probably going to be a guy who just plays closer to the line of scrimmage. Doesn't have to be in his junior year of college, but should be his sophomore year of college, I suppose. But it is going to happen. So whether or not Ohio State is like embracing that now or still trying to keep him as a safety, we'll see. Obviously, he can be effective, I think, at either spot, depending on where they think they need him, where the strengths and weaknesses are. But that'll be – it's a guy that I'm going to be hyper-focused on. It's not like he needs to get – some of these guys you want to look at them like, are you going to get bigger, stronger, faster? You're going to look like somebody who's ready to play. It's like clearly Sonny's ready to play. It's just like Sonny at 6'5", 225 and Sonny at 6'5", 239 is like a very different proposition. So I'm kind of curious to see where he lands coming out of these winter workouts.
Are we contractually obligated to talk about CJ Hicks after we talk about Sonny Styles? It feels like that's the only way this works.
They do seem to travel in pairs. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I've been around CJ Hicks enough to know that like he doesn't really look like he needs a touch of weight anymore. Like he looks like he's in pretty good shape.
He always has as well. That man is a physical specimen.
Yeah, he was college ready in high school, it seemed like. I don't know. I think like as Ohio State starts putting more of this stuff out and we get to see a little bit behind the curtain of what they're doing during winter workouts, it's less for me, like with a guy like CJ Hicks, about what he looks like or like how he's progressing physically, and maybe more about the role he has there. Like, are they featuring him more when they're showing some of these clips? Do you hear him vocalizing himself more in these workouts? And I think obviously this time of year is very important for the physical development of players, but I think we all know that it's probably equally as important for carving out leadership roles, figuring out who's going to be captains, figuring out who's not afraid to kind of lead their groups and, hold guys accountable. And maybe for a guy like CJ, that's difficult because he still hasn't played a ton relatively, but everyone's expecting him to step up into a larger role on the field. And I'm wondering like if that's in any way like showing up kind of off the field, so to speak, although they do their workouts on the field. During this winter period, like is he kind of taking the opportunity by the horns here and not only trying to become a better player and a guy who's going to play more this year, but a guy who can be a little bit more of an emotional leader for this team? Because there's plenty of veterans, right? Maybe that means it'll be difficult for a guy who hasn't played a lot to do it. But at the same time, there does feel like there's a little bit of a void there that guys could step up to fill when like you don't have Tommy Eichenberg anymore, and you don't have, Josh Proctor's not back there. And on the offensive side, you don't have Cade Stover. Like there are obvious candidates. I think we could all pick to step up there, but why couldn't it be someone like CJ Hicks, who's maybe a little more off the radar in that regard? So that's more what I'm curious about with him this time of year than I am like, are you benching more than you did last year?
Yeah, no. I mean, I forced you to talk about him by bringing him up, so it's not like he counts on your list. I would put him personally in that bucket of guys like March and April are going to be more important for him than January and February. When you step on the field, when he steps off the bus, there's never been that issue. Does CJ Hicks have the physical tools to play at a high level and be a starting caliber all Big Ten athlete performer at linebacker? I think we've all seen that for him. I think some of the things that you and Berm have talked about are, put him on the field and let him get those reps so that you don't fall behind in the learning curve, or you can speed up the learning curve, however that works out for this particular case. And I think those 2 reps in the Cotton Bowl, fair or unfair, probably unfair, are burned in my mind. It's not that he couldn't go out and make a tackle or blitz the quarterback. I thought he should on the second play where he got kind of lost on the scramble there. That's the stuff that's going to have to come with seeing and understanding the game and feeling it and being in it. And it's an age-old coaching catch-22. Like, you have to earn some of that stuff in practice before you get to do it in the game. I understand that fully. You're in this world now where it's like, it also seems unfair to say that it's make or break, and it's certainly not now or never, but it feels like that urgency has got to be there more in year 3, because you wouldn't expect to wait forever. And I don't think a lot of people thought that CJ Hicks would be a 4-year player for Ohio State, and maybe he won't be. We'll see how that transpires, but a lot of that is going to have to come for him in scrimmage situations, in these Saturday, higher leverage reps that are going to come throughout March and April, and not so much right now.
Yeah, he just needs to play more football. Like he hasn't played a lot. Like not even last year. Like he played more than he did as a freshman, because he played none as a freshman other than special teams. But even last year did not look how I thought it would look for him in terms of rep count. And I wasn't necessarily on alert for him to like force a rotation or certainly take a starting job for anybody. But I wasn't dismissive of the idea either, because he was such a highly rated recruit and clearly has a ton of athleticism. and didn't really come close to that. It was Cody Simon who did that, and good for Cody Simon. But now it feels like kind of do or die time. And I don't mean to be like too doom and gloom about that. Like doesn't mean that if CJ Hicks is an All-American as a third year that he's a failure, but he's got to show that he's ready to play now. And I think that has been difficult for him because he's had limited opportunities. I wonder if some of the less than stellar snaps we've seen from him are a byproduct of him perhaps trying to make too much of the opportunities that he's getting because he's not getting that many. Maybe you tend to press a little bit. So if he can be a little more comfortable with that in March and April, then maybe that brings out a higher level of play. But I do think you're right. I think he's more of an actual, like, those 15 practices kind of guy than he is what's going on like this time of year kind of guy.
Sure. All right. Who else without me leading you into another conversation?
Yeah, no. I mean, CJ Hicks is worth talking about, so I'm glad we talked about him. This is very much off the radar, I think, and not super important necessarily to 2024.
Ooh,
but
okay.
I do find myself very interested in Josh Padilla, who I like when Ohio State signed him, viewed him as the center of the future, I think, and obviously that position and its outlook for this year and beyond has changed a little bit with Carson Hinman kind of being sat down from the starting job in the Cotton Bowl, and they bring in Seth McLaughlin, who we think is going to start at center this year. And I don't know this. I'm assuming that if he's a starting center, that no matter how it shakes out, Carson Hinman's probably still your backup center. But is there an opportunity for Josh Padilla to really push for that? Like how far along is he in his physical development? And I guess, like, how close is he then to fulfilling these projections that Ohio State had for him? Because when they signed him, he was a little bit of an undersized guy, but fairly highly rated for, an interior lineman from Ohio. He's a decent recruiting pedigree. He's got the toughness you expect out of an Ohio lineman who was also a high level wrestler. Like I love that kind of player, but he's also, he wasn't going to play center at Ohio State at 270 pounds either. So he's got to get bigger. And I think in the roster right now, which is still weights from last year, he's listed at 6'3", 293. Like that's closer to where you need to be. It's probably not quite there just yet. So like his physical development, I think is interesting, if only to set the table a little bit for like the offensive line moving forward beyond this year, but also maybe to give us a little idea of how the depth chart might shake out. Like if Josh Padilla has a really good winter, really good spring, then I suppose he could be the number 2 center going into the 2024 season. Aside from Carson Hinman, there's not really another obvious candidate. There are interior linemen who you can teach the snap, but in terms of guys that we know Ohio State signed with the intention of playing in center, it's really only Carson Hinman and Josh Padilla. And it seems like Carson Hinman is transitioning out of that, and Josh Padilla is, like, I would assume, on track to this point, based off some stuff we've heard about how much people in the program like him. But this is a time for him to make a jump now. He's going into his sophomore year. He's going into a full off season of winter workouts and spring ball with an understanding of what it means now to be a college football player. And I think that's a time when guys can make pretty big jumps. So he's definitely a guy I'm going to have my eye on in the spring, but like now I actually think it's a really important time of year for him to start making some gains.
Yeah, that is an intriguing one. And you're right. There was a ton of growing conversation as the season progressed, thinking even late October into November, like, Ohio State was very encouraged by what they were seeing in practice. Not enough that it was like he was in position that he could have been considered for one of the swaps late in the year or in the Cotton Bowl, not to that extent, but certainly raising the bar for what to expect from him in the future. I think that also makes Carson Hinman pretty interesting to watch over the next 6 weeks. And what do his practices look like when you get back into March and April for Ohio State? Because we've talked about him and some of the struggles, practice struggles, game struggles, all of that you saw happening late in that first year in the starting lineup, and a little bit of regression. I didn't feel, to me, Bill, maybe you disagree, September, I just, and obviously the level of competition is a little different, but even against Notre Dame, it didn't feel like, well, gosh, Carson Hinman's just like getting overwhelmed. It's never going to happen. It didn't feel to me at the time like it was going to be a problem. And I'm not going to say that he can't overcome that. I understand how difficult it is to go out and do that job, handle those responsibilities for the first time. You're not going to be perfect. I'm not trying to hold him to that standard, but how will he respond to that challenge is critical.
Mm-hmm.
You have these opportunities to continue to develop physically, and I think that's important for the position he's played. And he did not. It looked very similar to that first year in the starting lineup for Luke Whipple. It's like you can see that it's gonna be there, but it's not quite. You're not quite at that weight, that strength, that knowledge, that fundamental technique, and all that stuff that you need to play center. It's just too early for that. But he can fine tune all those things and go back and battle with Seth McLaughlin or battle with Josh Padilla and get back out there. He has still got a year of starting experience under his belt. Obviously, the roster competition looks different now than it did in December, but I do think that is well worth watching because there's enough good stuff from year one that you don't have to just say, that's it, it's never going to happen, and throw all that away. The potential's still in there, and you actually have a pretty solid foundation to build on, all things considered.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. I think it's clear at this point, with the benefit of hindsight, that he was just probably playing a year too early. Like, and he went into it really green. Like he didn't play the year before. Like he didn't even get like 4 games of a handful of snaps before snapping the ball for the first time in that season opener last year against Indiana. So I guess the thing you're hopeful of is that he didn't develop like too many bad habits in the course of having some struggles throughout the latter part of the season. And even if he did, like I think you can overcome them. You can work with Justin Fry and Mike Seleni and try to get back on track with those kind of things. My biggest thing watching Carson last year, I felt like when he did struggle, was just didn't really seem like he was strong enough or consistently had the strength required to be a really good center, snap after snap, game after game. And that obviously points you back to this time of year when you can work on those kind of things. So I certainly wasn't trying to skip over him by mentioning Josh Padilla. That's for sure. I think you're right that Carson Hinman has an opportunity to, I don't know, make offensive line more interesting. I think it's already the most interesting position group, in the offseason because of what needs to get sorted out, especially on the right side of the line. But Carson Hinman, I think, is part of that conversation. And, I don't know, if he is a really good winter and spring, you're like, you know what? He wasn't that good last year, but we feel like he's really ready to take that step now. And we think that step is still at center, and we think that's still his future. Maybe you do play him at center and Seth McLaughlin plays guard. I don't know. I don't think anything's really written in stone there other than Donovan Jackson playing left guard and Josh Simmons playing left tackle. I think you have to keep an open mind, and because you weren't good enough last year on the offensive line by and large. So if a guy like Carson Hinman makes a jump, everybody like Tegra Shabola is worth watching this time of year. Luke Montgomery is worth watching this time of year. Even Seth McLaughlin, who's a veteran player who's not necessarily looking to make tremendous physical gains. He's probably just looking to maintain and fine tune some things. He's probably feeling a little bit of or I guess you would hope anyway, that he feels a push from those kind of guys. Like it needs to be as competitive as possible. And that's not only when spring practice starts in a couple of weeks of March. That happens now. I would hope that for Ohio State's sake, all of those guys on the offensive line are pushing each other, and that, when the dust settles, Ohio State feels like it has 3, 4, 5 viable candidates to be starters, because it certainly didn't feel that way last year. We're 1 year removed from that. Guys are more experienced. Some of these guys have actual, starts and meaningful playing time under their belt. So it should all be better. How it all shakes out, I'm not sure. We'll talk about it a lot, I think, throughout the course of spring. But that is a position and like competition for starting spots, I think that starts now. You don't necessarily have to wait for that to happen until spring ball starts.
Yeah, well said. Give me one more.
One more. There's a couple I could pick. Like, I'm interested in just kind of like seeing how Josh Mickens, I think he prefers, comes out of winter conditioning, because you saw him with the defensive ends last year. You're like, he looks like a cornerback. So I don't know. I don't know what you're going to do with him. So he's one, like, again, maybe that's not necessarily a 2024 proposition, but they need guys to kind of rise up and continue to develop, obviously, behind JT and Jack at defensive end. And if they're going to entertain the idea of the hybrid position more moving forward, not that Josh Mickens will be at the front of that list, but he's part of the conversation, I think, or at least a guy you consider in that role for the future. And I would, he didn't look much like a defensive lineman last year. He's just got kind of a unique build. He's really long, but he's also like kind of skinny and looks more like a linebacker or defensive back than he does necessarily a defensive end. But I've also seen guys like that come through Ohio State's program, go through 1 year of weight training, and then you see him the next time out in the spring ball, like, oh yeah, he is a defensive lineman. So I think he'll be an interesting guy to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the best example of that. Like someone like Jalen Holmes comes to mind.
Yeah,
yeah. He's tall and he's got pterodactyl arms, but is he going to put on some weight and then okay, 3 months later he weighs 275 pounds. Okay,
yeah,
and then 208. Like, oh, yeah. Well, that's what they were looking for. Yeah, that connected. I got you. You see that with Ohio State a good amount. Must mean that they're doing something in those videos and in those photos in the weight room. They're pretty productive time and a pretty important time of year for Ohio State. They're deep into it. So we had to come back and talk a little bit more about some guys who are going to need to make the most of that. So I think we could probably keep doing the series and get through all 85 and talk about them. But
yeah, just name the whole roster.
Yeah, we'll just name the whole roster. Like they're all going to do something building up till spring ball. I can't really believe now that January has flown by the last week of the month and we're spilling over into February. And before you know it, spring football will be here. So no matter what, we'll be talking about the Buckeyes and everything they do, and we'll keep doing that all year round. Thanks for joining us on the podcast daily. For Bill Landis, I am Austin Ward. We'll talk to you later.